They kept me in the ossuary wing, which was their word for it, not mine. To them it meant a place where interesting things eventually stopped being interesting. To me it was a room 9 feet by 11, big gray walls, a cot, a drain, and a window of some material that wasn't glass but did the job of glass. Looking out onto a corridor where the Vethric walked back and forth in their soft-soled boots, talking about me like I was a houseplant that had, against expectations, not yet died. The Vethric are tall, not dramatically, but enough that they never seem to be in a hurry, the way tall people rarely do. Gray-blue skin, faces a little too smooth, eyes set wide and lidless, so that even when they were laughing at me, and they laughed at me often, they looked faintly surprised about it, like the joke had snuck up on them too. Still sitting, one of them says on day 6, or what I'd started calling day 6, since there were no days on Carneth's Reach, only shift bells. His name, near as I could pronounce it, was Droon. He was young for a researcher, eager in the way young researchers are, which is to say he liked an audience. She's been sitting like that for 11 hours. Sitting is a survival strategy, said the older one, Vels. Vels had been assigned to the wing longer than anyone, and had the weary patience of someone who had given up trying to be impressed by anything. Conserve energy, very efficient, very boring. I read the file, Drun said. Command thought she'd be combat relevant, some kind of soldier cast. Command reads too many old surveys. Vels tapped the glass, not hard, just enough to make a sound. I didn't look up. I was doing what I always did, which was nothing, slowly. Bus, look at her. She hasn't tried the door in 4 days. She hasn't tried to talk to us. She just sits there being gray. Maybe she's broken. Maybe she was never anything else. I want to be clear that I wasn't offended. I'd spent 11 years doing satellite maintenance before the Reach pulled my shuttle out of the black with a tractor field and a great deal of unnecessary fanfare. And if there's one thing that job teaches you, it's how to be still while something enormous and confident does its work around you. You learn to watch. You learn that the people running the machine rarely look at the machine the same way twice, and that the gaps between those looks are where everything useful happens. So I sat, and I watched the bell schedule, and I watched the door. The door to my cell was as a simple maglock, the kind that releases on a timed cycle for specimen welfare checks. Vethric ships ran on schedules so rigid you could set a clock by the click of the bolt, which, as it happened, I did, counting it out against my own pulse until I had it to the second. I watched the corridor camera, which swept in a 40-second arc, and had a 2-second blind spot at the far wall, because the camera itself was old, and the housing had been knocked slightly out of true by something, sometime, and nobody had ever bothered to fix it, because why would you? The cell doors were locked. I watched Droon, mostly because Droon liked to talk, and Droon had a key tab on a lanyard that he tapped against the wall console out of habit, a little nervous tick, every single time he walked past. Tap, 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 3 taps, like a man counting his own footsteps. I never once saw him notice he was doing it, and I watched the lights. Carneth's Reach ran on a reactor core that cycled through a maintenance flush every 11 hours, during which the secondary systems, including, I'd worked out by day 9, cell's lock, ran on a buffer that took 4 seconds to re-engage after the flush completed. 4 seconds isn't long. But I'd had a long time to think about what 4 seconds could be, if you knew exactly when they were coming, and exactly what you'd do with them. She moved, Drun reported, around what I was calling day 12. He sounded almost betrayed. She stood up. She walked to the wall and looked at it for a while, and then she sat back down. What was on the wall? Nothing, it's a wall. Vels made a sound I'd come to recognize as the Vethric equivalent of a shrug, a kind of low exhale through the nose ridges. Log it. Specimen exhibited minor ambulatory behavior. No threat indicators. Honestly, I'm starting to think Command sent us the wrong file. This one's barely worth the air in here. Should we downgrade her? Already drafted it. I've got her scheduled for the general inspection at the next changeover. Lowest threat tier on the wing. Lower than the crates, probably. He laughed, that surprised laugh. I'd put the crates above her. The crates at least might fall on someone. I sat very still and thought. The general inspection at the next changeover. The changeover was the reactor flush. They'd scheduled their inspection. The one where every cell got a visual confirmation and a stamp, going down the row in order. Vels walking the corridor with his tablet, Droon trailing behind with his tapping key tab. For the exact 4-second window, I'd been waiting 12. I felt something large in that moment. Mostly what I felt was, oh good, that's convenient. The day of the inspection, Vels came down the row the way he always did, board, tablet in hand, glancing at each cell just long enough to confirm the specimen inside hadn't done anything noteworthy, which none of them ever had, which was rather the point of being a specimen. Drun trailed him. Tap, 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 the lanyard swinging. Cell 11, Vels said, not even looking up from the tablet. Anything. Sitting, Drun said. Of course she is. He made a note. I heard the stylus. Lowest tier confirmed. Moving on. The reactor flush hit on schedule. The lights doing that brief amber stutter they always did. And for 4 seconds the corridor lighting dimmed. The camera's sweep paused mid-arc with its blind spot square on my door, and the maglock's hum dropped out entirely. I'd been standing by the door for the last 90 seconds, which I'd timed to coincide with Droon's habitual 3-tap pause at the console 8 feet away. A pause that I'd noticed he always took with his back half turned, because the console was the only thing in the corridor worth looking at, in his opinion. And I was not. The lock released with a small, almost polite click. I didn't run. Running is for people who think someone's about to notice them, and the entire point of 12 days of sitting had been to make very sure that nobody was about to notice me. I walked, the way you walk when you've just remembered you left something in another room, unhurried, slightly distracted, the universal posture of a person who belongs exactly where they are. I went left, away from Vels and Droon, toward the maintenance gangway I'd watched 2 cargo techs use 11 times. Because cargo techs, unlike researchers, did not wear restricted access badges, they just walked through like they owned the place, which, I'd noticed, was apparently sufficient. I owned the place for about 90 seconds. That was enough. By the time the lights came back to full, and Droon's 3 taps resumed their rhythm, I was 3 decks away, in a supply alcove, sitting on a crate, being still. Being still, it turned out, was a skill that traveled. They didn't find me for 6 hours, and by the time they did, Droon, of all people, practically falling over me in a parts locker, his wide eyes going wider. There wasn't much left to find. I hadn't sabotaged anything. I hadn't taken a hostage, or stolen a shuttle, or done any of the things. I gathered later. Their threat assessment models were built to flag. I'd just walked around for 6 hours, looking at things the way I'd looked at the wall of my cell. Vels, when he arrived, less angry than tired, which I appreciated. I think on some level he understood exactly what had happened, and exactly why none of his instruments had been built to notice it happening. They put me back in the cell, obviously. Tighter watch, after that, for about a week anyway, until the watch went back to being bored, because boredom, I've found, always wins eventually. It's the most patient thing there is. More patient than fear, more patient than curiosity. The Vethric were very good at being afraid of the wrong things, and very good at being curious about the wrong things, but they had never had to be patient about anything. Not really. Not the way you have to be patient when you're 9 feet by 11, and the only thing you control is when you decide to stand up. I heard secondhand, weeks later, that the inspection report from that day had been quietly amended. One line. I never saw it myself, but Droon mentioned it once, in the corridor. Not realizing or maybe not caring that I could hear. They changed the threat tier, he said, on 11. To what? Vels asked. They didn't change the tier, Drun said. They just changed the status line. It used to say specimen low threat sedentary. And now it just says currently unoccupied. Nobody laughed at that one. I sat very still, and I thought that was on the whole a fair way to put it.